Welcome to Nero Wolfe's world, where orchids bloom and secrets unfold. Tell us where you're tuning in from. Archie will keep score, Wolfe won't admit he cares. Subscribe for more classic Nero Wolfe mysteries. Every good mystery deserves good company, and a little gratitude between cases. A warm thank you to Norma, our newest patron. Your support keeps the orchids blooming and the mysteries alive. Join the circle of mystery lovers on Patreon. Link in description. Nero Wolfe and the case. Saul refused twice. If there's a sound that can make a man reconsider his line of work, it's the telephone ringing at 12:47 in the morning. It's sliced through the brownstone like a knife through one of Fritz's soufflés, which is saying something, since Fritz treats his soufflés as sacred. I groped for the receiver, eyes half glued, and muttered something that might have passed for, "Yeah, if you'd been generous." "Archie?" The voice was tight, low, and carried a crackle I'd never heard from Saul Panzer. "Unless I've been promoted without notice, that's me," I said. "You sound like you swallowed a live wire." "I'm refusing a client." "Congratulations," I told him. "That's like a cat refusing cream. What's the occasion?" "She's already dead," Saul said, and hung up. I stared at the receiver, waiting for it to apologize. When it didn't, I set it back in the cradle and sat there a minute, listening to the Manhattan silence, which is to say, the faint hiss of tires and a taxi horn practicing for hell. If Saul Panzer was turning down work, there were two explanations. He was sick, or the world was. I decided to check which later. By morning, the answer was in the Gazette. Page 2, bottom column, Broadway designer strangled, Lorna Vale found dead in penthouse. The picture showed a pair of eyes that could make a man forget to blink. Beneath it, the caption mentioned police seeking confidential operative who may have been contacted by the victim prior to her death. That line was a match under the tinder of curiosity, and Wolfe naturally had to pour cold logic on it. At 9:30, I was at the dining table with coffee, bacon, and Fritz's cinnamon rolls that could make a priest break vows. Wolfe, across from me, was making an omelette vanish in a way that would have impressed any magician. He was silent, except for the symphony of cutlery. I'd let him get halfway through before I opened my mouth. "Saul Panzer called me last night." "Indeed?" Wolfe didn't look up. "He said he was refusing a client." "That is improbable. Mr. Panzer's discretion, while admirable, has never extended to masochism." "True, but he followed it up with, 'She's already dead,' and then hung up." That got his eyes off the plate. They were brown and cool like a brandy that had been poured and forgotten. "Whom?" "Lorna Vale, Broadway costume designer. Somebody strangled her with a silk cord. The Gazette says she may have hired an operative before she died. My guess is Saul was that operative." "Phooey." He dabbed his lips with a napkin, which in Wolfese meant I'd hit something close to the target. "He would not discuss a client's death with you at midnight unless he were compelled by circumstance. Did he request assistance?" "Nope, he hung up faster than a bill collector." "Then he will call again. Or he's sitting in the Tombs waiting for Kramer to misunderstand him." That earned me the brief tightening of Wolfe's mouth that substitutes for concern. He pushed back his chair and reached for his beer, but remembered it was before noon and changed his mind with visible suffering. "Mr. Goodwin, do not be flippant. Mr. Panzer's probity is beyond question. If he is involved, it will be in some involuntary capacity. The police will, of course, contrive to make it appear otherwise." I nodded. "Speaking of which, the Gazette says the cops are interested in a private operative last seen near West 58th Street. That sound familiar?" He sighed. "The press, a cataract of ignorance. They will complicate a murder as they would a recipe, by doubling the wrong ingredient. What did you learn of Miss Vale?" "Not much. Lived alone, made dresses for women who could afford to look desperate. Her doorman said she got a late visitor last night. Female. Left around midnight. Could be our client." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "And what is your source for that?" "I may have made a few calls while you were enjoying your beauty sleep." "Your enterprise, though commendable, is premature. However," he leaned back, fingers meeting in that cathedral pose of his, "you will fetch Mr. Panzer here before the police make a muddle. The delay of one morning could mean irreparable stupidity." "You've got away with pep talks," I said. "Any idea why Saul would refuse the same client twice?" He frowned. "Twice?" "He saw her once days ago, turned her down. Then she came back last night, Same request, same refusal. His words. Wolfe's lids drooped halfway. Then it was not the same woman. That's an interesting trick to pull, dying and changing your face. Not so. One impersonated the other. A common stratagem in theatrical circles, where deceit is cultivated as art. I grinned. You're starting to sound intrigued. He made a sound between a grunt and a sermon. I am not intrigued. I am provoked. It appears the contagion of imbecility spreads from Broadway to 8th Avenue. Bring Saul. I will hear his account. Fritz appeared at the doorway with the solemnity of a Swiss bishop. Shall I prepare the dining room, sir? No, Fritz. Mr. Goodwin is departing. I pushed back from the table. Fine, but if Saul's gone into hiding, I'm billing for mileage. He waved a dismissive hand. Your invoices are as irrelevant as your metaphors. Go. So I went. It was one of those mornings when Manhattan looked like it had been rinsed in brass polish. The cabs glittered, the pavement steamed from an overnight drizzle, and every pedestrian moved like they had a personal deadline with destiny. I swung by Saul's place first. His apartment was as anonymous as the man, clean, spare, and locked. The superintendent, who looked like he'd been up all night swapping gossip with radiators, said Saul had left around 11, alone. I tried a few haunts. The coffee pot at the Nighthawk Diner on 10th Avenue was still half full, the counterman still half awake. He squinted at me over his apron. Pantser? Sure. Sat there maybe 2 hours, left me a dime tip and a look that could curdle milk. That's Saul, generous with charm, stingy with small change. Did he meet anyone? Lady, fancy coat, didn't order. Sat 10 minutes. He told her no, she told him something about regret, then she left. He looked like he'd bitten a lemon. What time? Little before 1. That nailed the timeline. I left him a buck to prove good manners still existed, and headed back to the brownstone. Wolfe was in the office, glowering at the morning mail as if the envelopes had personally offended him. The smell of orchids drifted faintly through the open door from upstairs. Theodore must have cracked the plant room window again. Well? He demanded. No Saul, but the diner man says he met a woman in mink around 12:45, told her no again, and she left. Then Saul sat a while, looking like his conscience was on fire. Wolfe grunted. Describe the woman. Mid-30s, tall, blonde, eyes that could make a mirror jealous. Might have been Lorna Vale, might have been her ghost. Hard to say with the lighting. He sat back. Mr. Goodwin, you have an admirable gift for ambiguity. Thanks. I'm saving it for my memoirs. He ignored that. This woman, if not the deceased, is vital. Find her. And if she's the deceased, then find whoever arranged her resurrection. The bell rang. I went to the door, half expecting Kramer's bulldog silhouette, but it was the paper boy with a late-morning extra. The headline screamed, Broadway Strangler Strikes, Designer's Secret Meeting with Detective. I brought it in and laid it on Wolfe's desk. He read the headline, nostrils flaring. Confound Lon Cohen and his ilk. Publicity is the gangrene of reason. Don't look at me, I said. I didn't leak it. Though I admire the touch. Makes us sound glamorous. He jabbed a finger toward the phone. Call Mr. Cohen. Inform him that if he values his access to truth, he will suppress conjecture about Mr. Pantser. I picked up the receiver. Sure. And when I'm done, shall I tell the East River to stay in its lane? Wolfe's brows arched. Your facetiousness will earn you penury, Archie. My charm will balance it out. He leaned back, eyes half-lidded. Fetch Saul, and bring the Gazette's morning edition from the lobby. We shall breakfast again when stupidity subsides. Meaning around Judgment Day. He didn't answer, which meant I'd hit too close to prophecy. I pocketed my notebook and reached for my hat. Fritz, ever the sentinel, appeared with my coat like I was heading to war. Be careful, Mr. Goodwin, he said softly. Mr. Pantser, he is a good man. Yeah, I said, and when good men start refusing clients, something's rotten backstage. As I stepped out into the bright, deceitful morning, I couldn't shake the echo of Saul's voice on the line. She's already dead. Maybe he'd meant the woman. Maybe he'd meant something else. Either way, Wolfe was right about one thing. If we didn't get to Saul before Kramer did, the next call might come from police headquarters, and that one wouldn't hang up so politely. I hailed a cab, thinking how every case starts the same way. A ring in the night, a word you can't ignore, and a feeling you're about to earn your pay the hard way. And, brother, I was right. An hour later, around 11:15 at the 10th Avenue Diner, the kind back at the 10th Avenue Diner, on a later pass, the kind of place that makes you question civilization, the air was half grease, half regret, and entirely awake. Neon buzzed above the counter like it was arguing with itself. In a rear booth sat Saul Pantzer, hunched over a cup of coffee that looked as weary as he did. Saul's the kind of man who could tail his own shadow and lose it. Seeing him sit that still, with his hat brim shading eyes that usually missed nothing, made me uneasy. I slid into the booth across from him and said, "If you're hiding from the law, you picked the right cologne. No detective alive would follow the scent of burned bacon this far." He didn't smile. "You shouldn't be here, Archie." "That's what Wolfe says every time I come home," I said. "You called me, remember? Or was that your evil twin who hangs up after midnight confessions?" Saul stirred his coffee without drinking it. "I shouldn't have called." "Probably true. You're rattling my faith in human predictability. You've turned down a client. That's like Fritz burning toast." "She said her name was Mrs. Vale," he muttered, eyes on the window where the late morning light smeared the glass. "Said her husband was blackmailing her. Wanted me to meet him, find the leverage, end it quietly." "And you refused because?" "She lied. The address she gave didn't exist." He looked up then, and his face had that hard calm a man gets after deciding he doesn't deserve breakfast. "I don't work lies, not when they start that early." I leaned back. "So you skipped the job and now she's dead. That's lousy timing, even for New York." He grimaced. "Don't, Archie." "Sorry. Habit. I'm the comic relief." I sipped my coffee, it tasted like last night's mistake, and added, "You sure she used that name?" "Yes, and I never met her twice. Whoever saw her again, it wasn't me." He said it flat, the way you tell a fact you'd rather forget. There was something under his tone, though, a thickness that wasn't guilt but came close. Outside, a delivery truck coughed past. The waitress dropped another plate of fried optimism on the counter. The place felt like it had been invented for secrets that shouldn't live past sunrise. I said, "Look, you and Truth have been steady companions longer than I've had hair cream. If you're telling me you didn't see her again, I'll believe it. But somebody will want proof, and Kramer's the type who collects it with a net." Saul's jaw tightened. "Let Kramer come. I've handled worse." "Maybe, but you've never handled Wolfe when he's half curious and half annoyed before breakfast. That combination could melt asphalt." That earned the faintest flicker of amusement. "He sent you?" "He ordered me. Said, and I quote, 'Fetch Mr. Panzer before the police make a muddle.' When he uses the word fetch, I know I'm the Labrador in residence." "I'm not going back there." "Why not?" He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and produced an envelope, yellowed at the edges, sealed but creased like it had been handled by second thoughts. "She left this for Wolfe. Said if I refused, I should see he got it." Efficient lady. I took it and sniffed. Habit. There was a faint scent that didn't belong in any diner. Powder and something sharper, a backstage tang of theatrical grease paint. "You planning to tell me what's in it before I risk Wolfe's eyebrows?" "No, I didn't open it. Her money was clean, the job wasn't." "Saul, someday you'll let your conscience rest. It's been overworked for years. You ever think of laundering it?" That got the glare. A real one, not the half-smile variety. "Cut it out." "Fine," I said. "You win the gloom contest. So now what? You disappear, or we do this civilized and walk into the brownstone before Kramer decides you're his breakfast headline." He rubbed his temples. "Archie, I can't walk into Wolfe's office, not yet. Tell him I'm clear, but not safe." That line did wonders for my blood pressure. "Meaning someone's after you?" "Meaning someone's watching to see what I do next." He reached for his coffee, drank it at last, and stood. "You'd better go. They might follow you." "Saul, I've been followed by professionals. If anyone tags along, I'll charge admission." He dropped money on the table and pulled his hat lower. "Tell Wolfe to read the envelope carefully. Everything starts there." Before I could protest, he was out the door and into the drizzle, dissolving into the morning like a rumour. I sat there a moment longer, eyeing the coffee pot. The waitress drifted over, chewing gum with the patience of a saint who'd seen too many sinners. "Your friend in trouble?" she asked. "Only morally. He's allergic to lies." She snorted. Then he picked the wrong town. I left her the change and headed uptown, the envelope safe inside my coat. A cabbie outside hailed me before I hailed him. Always a bad sign. "You Goodwin?" he asked. "Depends who's asking." "Guy said to give you this." He passed a small paper bag through the window. Inside was a key tag, brass, tarnished, engraved Suite 3C, the Imperial Arms. It smelled faintly of grease paint, like the envelope. I looked up to ask where he'd gotten it, but the cab peeled away like a guilty conscience. By the time I reached West 35th Street, my head was full of puzzle pieces that didn't like each other. I rang our bell at 12:35 on the dot. Fritz opened the door, expression carved in Swiss disapproval. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "you bring trouble before lunch." "Strictly for seasoning." I brushed past him toward the office. Wolfe was at his desk, glowering at the morning mail as though it had insulted his ancestry. The room smelled of orchid fertilizer and coffee, his kind of incense. He glanced up, registering both my existence and the envelope. "You have him?" I had him. He evaporated, left me this. I placed the envelope on his blotter. And a souvenir from an anonymous cabbie. He eyed both like a biologist meeting new bacteria. "Explain." I did, from diner to drizzle, skipping only the part where I nearly admired Saul's ethics. Wolfe listened without interruption, except for one sigh when I described the smell of the place. "Grease," he muttered. "It clings." When I finished, he said, "He is frightened." "Panzer? He's allergic to fear." "Not of death, of dishonor. There is a difference." He took a paper knife and slit the envelope. Inside were two items, a theatre pass to the Imperial Repertory and a note card bearing a single sentence, handwritten, elegant, dangerous. "The gown is insured for more than it's worth," Wolfe grunted. "So, the motif is the stage, how suitably tawdry." "Yeah," I said. And here I thought I was done with grease paint for life. He turned the brass tag over in his fingers, sniffed it once and frowned. "Suite 3C. Do you recognize the name Imperial Arms?" "Hotel near the theatre district. Medium rent, maximum scandal." "Excellent. You will ascertain who occupies Suite 3C. Before or after breakfast?" "After," he said curtly. "Fritz!" The door opened with Swiss punctuality. "Yes, sir?" "Mr. Goodwin will require sustenance before embarking on his folly. Poached eggs, bacon, bread tolerable to his palate." I saluted Fritz. The man knows my weaknesses. Wolfe ignored me, reading the note again. A blackmail claim, an overinsured gown, and two women using one name. The skein tangles elegantly. "You sound almost pleased." "I am repelled, Archie, but not ungrateful. Without human folly, my occupation would cease." I grinned. "You'd still have the orchids." He looked up sharply. "The orchids do not prevaricate." I sat at my desk, opening the Gazette to the crime column. Lorna Vale's photo stared back. Beautiful, sure, but with eyes that hinted she'd seen the script before and didn't like the ending. I said, "If Saul's being watched, that means someone knows he's linked to her. Maybe they also know he handed you this envelope." "Unquestionably," Wolfe leaned back. "We shall anticipate intrusion." "Want me to post a guard?" "No, that would alarm Fritz and waste money. Merely keep your revolver where it belongs." "Which pocket?" "The one least reachable by your impulses." That ended the conversation the way Wolfe likes best, him winning. I glanced again at the theatre pass, at the neat embossed name Imperial Repertory, and felt the faint smear of grease paint on my thumb. Whoever Mrs. Vale really was, she'd left her calling card on more than fabric. Fritz reappeared with my breakfast, and Wolfe dismissed him with a nod. He unfolded the Gazette beside his plate, muttering, "Broadway, a bazaar of pretense. Mr. Goodwin, when your errands conclude, bring Mr. Panzer here. If he resists, drag him by his scruples." "Sure," I said, buttering toast. "But if Kramer finds him first, it'll be the scruples that get handcuffed." Wolfe closed his eyes, which meant the conversation had been adjourned by royal decree. I finished my coffee, pocketed the key tag, and headed for the door. Behind me his voice floated, precise as ever. "Archie, exercise prudence." I turned. "Always, except when it's dull." He harumphed, which in our household is affection disguised as indigestion. Outside, the day had brightened, but the smell of grease paint lingered on my sleeve like a promise, and promises in this town usually come with murder attached. If you ever want to test your nerve, try bluffing your way past a doorman who thinks your tie doesn't match your shoes. The guy at the Carlton Towers gave me the kind of look reserved for people who bring sandwiches to an opera. It was 10:30 a.m., bright and brittle, and I had a letterhead from Nero Wolfe folded in my pocket like a shield of righteousness. I gave him my best grin and said, "Press credentials, buddy. Cultural division." He blinked twice and hit the elevator button like he didn't want to, which was fine by me. Lorna Vale's penthouse occupied the kind of floor that makes you wonder how many lies you'd have to tell to live there. The doors were frosted glass with gilt numbers, and when the elevator opened, I could already smell the aftermath: perfume, smoke, and the faint metallic edge of police work. Inside, Inspector Kramer was prowling the room with a cigar that wasn't lit, but was threatening to be. He glanced up when I entered, frowned like he was trying to remember what kind of mistake I was, and growled, "You again. Where's Wolfe?" "Home, guarding civilization," I said. "He sent me to observe and take notes." Kramer's jaw twitched. "You've got 10 minutes before I toss you out. That's a professional courtesy, not a habit." "Appreciated," I said, and looked around. The place was Art Deco elegance on the rocks, lacquered furniture, mirrored walls, and a carpet that had recently lost its innocence. A toppled chair near the vanity still carried an imprint of perfume and panic. Across the room, a uniformed patrolman catalogued Lorna Vale's jewellery box, which looked more like an investment portfolio. On the vanity sat a sketch folio, open to a half-finished design, a gown traced in charcoal with a red mark down the hem like blood pretending to be fashion. One page was missing, neatly torn. I didn't have to be Wolfe to know what that meant, either a thief with scissors or someone too nervous to rip loudly. I moved closer, casually. "She designed costumes, huh? Expensive lies for rent." Kramer snorted. "That's Broadway for you. Half the crowd there lives off what they can pretend to be." That was my cue for a wisecrack, but the room didn't feel like earning one. The body was gone, but the scent wasn't, a trace of expensive powder and finality. Kramer jabbed the cigar toward the folio. "You see that missing page? Maid says Miss Vale was finishing something special last night. Client wouldn't wait till morning. I've got a dozen alibis to check and $1,000 in sketches to bag." He said it flat without the usual bark. The man looked tired, not the kind of tired you fix with sleep, but the kind you get from chasing the same mistakes through different apartments. I said, "Any word on Saul Panzer?" That got his eyes sharp. "So, you know he's mixed up in it." "Mixed up's a strong phrase. Let's just say he was on the guest list." Kramer exhaled smoke that wasn't there. "He's on mine too. A witness says she heard her boss talking about the man she finally dared hire. That could mean a detective, and you know how small that club is." "Could mean a tailor," I said. "The woman made gowns." "Could mean you." That earned him a grin. "Sorry, my evenings are fully booked with moral superiority." He ignored me and crossed to the fireplace. There was a half-burned calling card among the ashes. He poked it with his cigar, frowned, and said, "You can read half of it. R. Garnett. That name ring a bell?" I leaned closer, careful not to overstep the police perimeter tape. "Not yet, but give me an hour and a sandwich and maybe it will." Kramer pocketed the card. I caught the flick of his wrist and made a note of where it went. The man had a way of filing evidence that suggested he'd learned from Wolfe's efficiency and resented it. The maid hovered near the doorway, a little sparrow of a woman with eyes that had seen too much. I went over to her. "You were with Miss Vale last night?" "Yes, sir. I went off at 10. She said she had company coming, a woman." "Did she name her?" "No, sir. Only said, 'He finally agreed.' Then she laughed and said she wasn't afraid anymore." I glanced at Kramer, who was pretending not to listen. "You sure she said he?" "Yes, sir." That was a curveball. Either the maid had misheard or we'd been watching the wrong side of the gender fence. I jotted it down. Wolfe would chew on that till it made sense. The uniformed cop at the door cleared his throat. "Inspector, there's a Mr. Heller downstairs. Claims he's the building manager." "Send him up," Kramer said. While he turned to the door, I took my chance and bent near the fireplace. Among the ashes was a small scrap of white card the inspector had missed, too charred to read, but clean on one corner. I took out my notepad, slipped the photostat paper Wolfe insists I carry, and pressed the scrap flat under it. The heat residue left a faint impression, a looping R, then something like Garn. I tucked the photostat into my wallet, perfectly legal, no original evidence removed. Kramer turned back. "You're still here?" "Technically, yes. Mentally, I left 5 minutes ago." "Good. Leave physically, too." I smiled. "With pleasure. If you see Saul, tell him to shave before you arrest him. He looks better in headlines that way." Kramer grunted. "If I find Saul, I'll tell him to thank his friends for lousy timing." That sounded like weariness, not malice. I took it as permission to live. Downstairs, the lobby gleamed with marble and gilt. I paused by a vase taller than me and took stock. The pattern was forming, the way it always does. 2 lies, 1 corpse, 1 missing sketch, and a client who'd hired the wrong man twice. Back at the brownstone, the clock in the office read a little past noon. Fritz had set lunch on the dining table, but Wolfe was still in his chair, both thumbs pressed together like he was sealing an invisible envelope. I said, "Kramer's tired enough to be almost polite. That's how bad it is. He gave me 10 minutes and I gave him the runaround." "Commendable restraint," Wolfe said dryly. "Did you learn anything of value?" "Maybe. The maid says Lorna mentioned hiring a man she wasn't afraid of anymore. Kramer thinks it's Saul. I think it's a setup." He nodded once, eyes half closed. "Continue." "She had a sketchbook, 1 page missing, burned card in the fireplace, name half gone, reads R. Garnett. And I took a photostat impression of the edge before Kramer could sneeze on it." At that, his brows rose. "You handled ashes?" "I used paper." Show me." I handed him the photostat. He examined it like it was a clue to the human condition. "Renee Garnett," he said finally. "A designer, if memory serves. Worked with Miss Vale 2 seasons ago." "That fits," I said. "The name sounds theatrical. Probably knew where the bodies were hemmed." He frowned. "Archie." "Yeah?" "Restrain your levity. This is no time for wit." I wasn't being witty, I was being accurate. "Phooey," he leaned back. "This Garnett woman must be located. If she is alive, she may answer for the imposture. If not, she may explain it. Kramer's already on that trail. Then we shall overtake him, not follow. The police investigate to conclude. We investigate to understand." "Fine," I said. "You understand while I do the legwork." "Indeed. And Archie?" "Yeah." "Be wary of women in disguise." "I'm always wary, sometimes too late." That got a faint grunt that could have been amusement. Fritz appeared in the doorway, punctual as a metronome. "Lunch, sir." Wolfe rose with the sigh of a man accepting mortality. "Archie, you may join me after you telephone Mr. Panzer. He must be brought to heel before Mr. Kramer construes him as quarry." "Fine," I said. "But if Saul's in the wind, I'll need to chase him past Broadway." Wolfe paused at the door. "Then wear shoes appropriate for theatre dust." When he left, I sat at the desk and dialed. The line to Saul's number rang unanswered, a hollow sound that made the brownstone suddenly feel too large. On the blotter lay the photostat, the faint letters glimmering like a ghost of handwriting, R. Garnett. Whoever she was, she'd left her calling card in the ashes. I leaned back, watching the morning light crawl across Wolfe's bookshelves, and said aloud to no one, "Somebody on that stage forgot their lines." Then I got up, grabbed my hat, and went to find who'd rewritten the script. If I had a nickel for every time Nero Wolfe looked at a murder clue like it had insulted his digestion, I could buy the Gazette and print it in colour. It was 10 minutes past 1, and the brownstone smelled like Fritz's pheasant under glass, rich enough to make an honest man forget crime altogether. Wolfe sat behind his desk, glowering at 3 objects arranged with military precision. The photostat from the fireplace, a theatre pass stamped Imperial Repertory, and the brass key tag that read, Suite 3C. He regarded them as if they'd committed treason. "Murder," he said finally, "is a vulgar interruption to digestion." "That's because you schedule your stomach ahead of the homicide rate," I told him. "Try letting life butt in once in a while." He raised an eyebrow. "Life, Mr. Goodwin, rarely announces itself with grace. It intrudes like you." I grinned. "Touché." Now, about our props on the table. The theatre pass connects to Lorna Vale's world. The key tag leads to a suite in a hotel popular with actors, crooks, and anyone else who likes mirrors. And the photostat gives us a name, Renee Garnett. Unless she moonlights as a laundry brand, she's real. Indeed. Wolfe folded his hands, fingertips kissing in the air. You are certain of the transcription? Positive. I made the impression myself before Kramer's man could sneeze on it. Wolfe, this Renee Garnett worked with Vale. The Gazette files list her as assistant costumer at the Imperial. The same theatre stamped on that pass. He took in a long breath, heavy enough to move curtains. The theatre, he said, is humanity in its most bearable disguise. Men spend their lives concealing motives. Actors merely charge admission for it. Poetic, I said. But what's our next act? Fritz appeared in the doorway, the silver tray balanced like a diplomatic communique. Lunch, sir, Wolfe inhaled. Ah, he gestured toward the desk. Set it there. The dome lifted, and the aroma filled the office like an orchestra warming up. He carved one precise slice, took a bite, and closed his eyes in pained pleasure. Pheasant, Archie, reminds one that God, unlike man, appreciates detail. Sure, I said, but God never had to wash your napkins. He ignored me, chewing thoughtfully. Miss Vale's profession revolved around deception. Costumes conceal, disguises liberate. If she died for one, we must determine who feared exposure. Maybe her assistant, this Renee Garnett, had more ambition than taste. He opened his eyes. Speculation is cheap, Archie. Verification, alas, is expensive. You will visit the Imperial repertory, discreetly. Define discreetly. You will not brandish your tongue. That limits me to semaphore, he sighed. You may employ irony, but not indiscretion. The theatrical tribe, being sensitive, must be stroked, not shaken. That's my specialty. Your vanity exceeds your ability, he said, without rancour. However, I rely upon your face. People speak to it before they realize they should not. Thanks, I said. That's almost affectionate. He waved a hand. Pfui, report before 6. At 4 I am with my orchids. After 6 I dine. Fritz, hovering like a benevolent ghost, cleared the dishes. Wolfe dabbed his mouth with precision. Fritz, we are not to be disturbed until the evening post. Of course, sir. When Fritz left, I pulled the theatre pass toward me. You think this Garnett dame's the same R. Garnett on the burned card? Unquestionably. Miss Vale's assistant, by all accounts. She designed 2 gowns last season for a musical revue titled Lady in the Dark. Do you recall the plot? Some lady, lots of darkness. Precisely. A meditation on identity and deceit. He gestured at the pass. Our motif persists. Whoever killed Miss Vale did so amid layers of masquerade. Find the costume behind the crime. I pocketed the pass and the key tag. If this leads me into a chorus dressing room, you'll owe me hazard pay. He frowned. If it leads you into folly, you will owe me patience. Go. I went. The Imperial repertory sat on West 46th Street, its marquee flashing like it knew it was lying. The smell inside was grease paint, dust, and cheap perfume, the perfume trying harder than the actresses. Backstage was a jungle of ropes, costumes, and gossip. I flashed the pass to a stagehand who looked like he'd been carved out of burlap and said, "Press coverage for a feature on Miss Vale's designs." He shrugged and pointed toward the costume department. Inside, racks of sequined dreams waited for bodies. And at the sewing table sat a woman who could have been carved by sharp lighting, tall, auburn hair, eyes too direct to belong to the supporting cast. "Miss Garnett," I said. She looked up, thread between her fingers. "Who wants to know?" "Archie Goodwin. I'm helping Mr. Wolfe look into Miss Vale's death." Her hands froze mid-stitch. "Then you're wasting your time. I already told the police I hadn't seen Lorna in weeks." "That's funny," I said. "Her maid swore she mentioned you last night." She was mistaken. "Maybe. The same way your name accidentally turned up half-burned in her fireplace." That one hit. The needle in her fingers snapped. She said quietly, "You have a flair for melodrama, Mr. Goodwin." "It comes with the city license. You ever visit her apartment?" "No." "You sure?" She met my gaze, steady but defensive. "Positive. We argued 3 months ago about credit on a design. After that, nothing." "Design like this one?" I held up a rough tracing of the missing sketch Wolfe had described, the one with diamond inlays. I'd sketched it from descriptions in Lorna's folio notes. Her eyes flicked to it too quickly. Where did you get that? Let's say it followed the money. You recognize it. I designed it, she said. But the diamonds were a gimmick. Stage jewelry. Lorna exaggerated to the investors. So you didn't profit? Do I look rich? No, but you look like someone who knows where the profit went. Her lips tightened. You're wasting your time, Mr. Goodwin. Lorna was brilliant but careless. If she was blackmailing someone, I wasn't that someone. Blackmail? Who mentioned that? She realized too late. I heard rumors. Sure, I said. Rumors travel faster than talent. I let the silence stretch. In the distance, a piano was running scales. Stage life continued in different corpses. Finally, she said, softer, You think I killed her? I think you're lying about not seeing her. I didn't kill her, she said firmly. I went there once, days ago, to get back my sketches. She wasn't home, that's all. Convenient timing. The night she dies, your name burns in her fireplace. That's impossible. Everything's impossible till Wolfe explains it, I said. She gave a short laugh. I've heard of him, the big man who never leaves his chair. Exactly, which means he's never wrong from a distance. I stood. If he wants to talk to you, you'll hear from me. Till then, keep your scissors sharp. Outside, the stagehand leaned on a coil of rope. You get anything? He asked. Only suspicion. Yours? She's a good girl, he said, but she had a visitor last night. Tall woman in a mink. Didn't see her face. Left in a hurry. That was enough to keep my pulse interested. I slipped him $1 and told him to remember I'd never been there. By 4:30, I was back at the brownstone. The orchids were getting their daily sermon from Wolfe, and the smell drifted through the upper hall. I waited until 6, typing notes and dodging Fritz's attempts to fatten me with coffee cake. When Wolfe finally descended in the elevator, his face looked freshly steamed. Report, he said. I handed him the notes. Renee Garnett, alive, defensive, and lying about not visiting Lorna Vale. She slipped once, mentioned blackmail, claims she only wanted sketches back. A stagehand saw a woman in mink visit her last night. Could be our impersonator. He nodded slowly. You were diplomatic. As a cobra at a picnic. Archie. Relax. She's breathing. And talking. Excellent. He tapped the notes. The theatre reflects humanity, and humanity never tires of deceit. Continue tomorrow, for tonight we eat. Fritz appeared as if summoned by telepathy. Dinner is served, sir. Wolfe rose, casting one last look at the photostat and key tag. Murder, Archie, remains vulgar, but the stage ennobles the vulgar. Sure, I said, following him to the dining room. Just don't start applauding it. He didn't answer, which was fine. In our house, silence was the curtain call. If Broadway ever decided to bottle its perfume, it would smell like cheap roses, hot lights, and trouble-wearing lipstick. Back again, by the time I ducked through the stage door of the Imperial, the matinee crowd had scattered, but the air backstage was still twitching with energy, the kind that comes from too many mirrors and not enough honesty. The stage manager, a thin man with a pencil behind each ear and suspicion behind both eyes, stopped me before I'd crossed 3 sandbags. You got business here? Yeah, I said. Cultural inspection. I'm with the Bureau of Taste. He didn't laugh, which put him in the minority. Name? Archie Goodwin. His eyebrows twitched. Wolfe's man? You've heard of him? Who hasn't? Big guy. Eats like a choir of locusts. Don't tell me he's doing drama criticism. Not yet, I said. He's still working up to the exertion of a curtain call. I'm just looking for Miss Renee Garnett. He thumbed toward a maze of hanging costumes and said, Last dressing room on the left. Don't trip over the scenery. It's more expensive than you. That was my cue to enter the jungle. Ropes hung like vines, sequined gowns sparkled in the dim light, and the floor smelled of sawdust and face powder. Actors in various stages of undress floated by, trailing chatter and smoke. A chorus girl winked as she powdered her shoulders. You lost, handsome? Perpetually, I said, and kept moving. Renee Garnett's dressing room door was half open. Inside, she stood before a mirror rimmed with tired bulbs, removing stage makeup with the care of a surgeon dismantling a disguise. Up close, she was the kind of woman you didn't mistake for innocent. Too many sharp lines in the face, too much precision in the voice. She glanced at me in the mirror. "You again? I told the press I wasn't talking." "Good thing I'm not the press," I said. "I'm the follow-up act." Her eyes flicked to mine in the reflection. "Mr. Goodwin, wasn't it? Working for that immovable man who never leaves his chair." "That's him. I'm the mobile division." "I already told you everything I know about Lorna Vale." She dabbed at her cheek, which wasn't much. "Let's pretend you left something out. It'll make the conversation feel new." That got me a look sharp enough to shave with. "She stole my designs. Everyone in the wardrobe department knows it. I made the gown sketches. She took the credit. End of story." "Sure," I said. "Except the end of that story involves strangulation. Usually plagiarism isn't fatal unless the critics get hold of it." Renee turned then, arms folded, silk robe cinched tight. "You think I killed her for a sketchbook?" "I don't know yet. I'm still testing motives for traction." She gave a short laugh that had no humour in it. Lorna Vale was a thief and a flirt. She liked men who paid attention and women who didn't. Maybe one of them finally noticed too much. While she vented, I took in the room. It was a small, glittering chaos. Jars of rouge, spools of thread, a half-finished gown draped over a chair. A swatch of fabric, torn unevenly, hung from a pin on the wall. Silver-grey silk with a faint scatter of sequins. It matched the missing design Wolfe had described, the one with diamond inlays. I touched the edge. "Nice material. Custom." Her voice was cool. "Imported from Paris, before the war." "Same as the gown in Lorna's folio." Her jaw tightened. "I told you. She stole it." I looked at her reflection in the mirror. "Then why is the sample still here?" She hesitated just long enough to count. "I had more than one bolt. She took the rest." "Convenient," I said. "You think I'm lying." "Habit of mine. Saves time later." She leaned against the table, eyes bright with defiance. "You don't know theatre, Mr. Goodwin. It's all theft. Lines, gestures, dreams. We steal everything and call it art." "Yeah," I said. "That's the motto right under the city seal." She smiled, a brittle, tired smile. "You're amusing. Lorna liked men who were amusing. Maybe that's why she called Saul Panzer first." That stopped me. "Who told you that name?" She blinked, realizing the slip. "It was in the papers, wasn't it?" "Nope. The papers said she called a detective, no names." "So how do you know it was Saul?" Her mouth opened, then closed. "Someone mentioned it backstage. I forget who." "Try remembering." She shrugged, reaching for a cigarette. "Does it matter? You all work together. One of you gets a job, the rest gossip about it." "Maybe, but not before breakfast." I took the match from her fingers and lit it myself, just to watch her reaction. She exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. "You're wasting your time, Mr. Goodwin. I didn't see Lorna after that fight 3 months ago." "Then you've got a real memory problem," I said, "because your name turned up in ashes at her apartment fireplace." That hit harder than I expected. Her hand shook, sending a curl of ash onto the vanity. "That's not possible." "Funny," I said. "That's what she probably thought." Before she could recover, the door creaked open and a burly stagehand stuck his head in. "Hey, Miss Garnett, they need the blue gown for the second act rehearsal." "Oh." His eyes landed on me. "You the guy been asking about her?" "That depends," I said. "Who's been asking about me?" He frowned. "Somebody in the alley this morning, didn't give a name. Said he wanted to know where he could find the smart-mouthed detective snooping around. I figured that meant you." "That's flattering," I said. "I haven't even handed out cards." Renee's cigarette paused halfway to her lips. "You're being followed?" "Apparently. I bring out the social instinct in people." The stagehand shrugged. "Tall guy, grey coat. Looked like he missed his calling as a bouncer. If he comes back, I'll let him in. Saves the hinges." He left, chuckling to himself. I turned back to Renee. "Recognize the description?" "No," she said too quickly. I nodded. "If you remember suddenly, call me before he does." "I don't have your number." "Sure you do. It's in the phone book under Patience of Wolfe Nero. Expired." I left before she could throw the ashtray. Outside, the sky had the colour of old pewter. A drizzle slicked the alley, making the cobblestones shine like guilty consciences. I walked toward the street, hands in pockets, eyes adjusting to the gloom. Somewhere behind me, a door closed softly. Footsteps echoed, too measured to be chance. I cut left, passing the side entrance where posters for Lady in the Dark curled in the damp. The rhythm behind me quickened. Whoever it was, they wanted me to know I wasn't alone. I turned abruptly, stepping into the light of a street lamp. The alley was empty except for a trash can, a cat, and the sound of rain. The cat meowed like it knew something but wasn't talking. "Fine," I said aloud. "Play it mysterious." When I reached 8th Avenue, the traffic noise swallowed the silence. I hailed a cab back to the brownstone, deciding against dramatics. Wolfe's rule number 1, never chase shadows unless they're on your payroll. It was 6:30 when I walked in. The smell of roast duck hit me before Fritz did. He appeared in the doorway, serene as always. "Mr. Goodwin, dinner is almost ready. Mr. Wolfe insists you not disturb him before 8. "Tell him this is disturbing enough." I hung up my hat and headed for the office anyway. Wolfe was there, seated like a mountain of disapproval. The lamp glowed gold on his desk. The orchid scent drifted faintly from upstairs. "You're late," he said. "I was being followed. I like to make my fans work for it." His brows lifted. Followed? By whom? Unknown admirer. Maybe the same person who fed Miss Garnet Saul's name. She's playing coy, but she slipped. He tapped the bell cord once, then released it. "You will not play heroics, Archie." "I'll try," I said, "but no guarantees." "Try harder." He closed his eyes. "This case stinks of theatricality. Masks within masks. Do not become one." "Don't worry," I said. "If they try to cast me, I'm demanding top billing." That earned me a reluctant grunt, which from Wolfe counts as applause. Fritz's voice drifted in. "Dinner is served, sir." Wolfe rose. "Archie, wash your hands. You reek of grease paint and imprudence." "Sure," I said, trailing him out. "But at least one of those washes off." The next morning, a little before breakfast, the phone rang, either a wrong number or Inspector Kramer. The odds were 50-50, but I lost. It was 8:10, the house still quiet except for Fritz clinking pans in the kitchen and the distant sigh of Wolfe pretending to sleep through life. I lifted the receiver. "Nero Wolfe's office. Archie Goodwin speaking, polite as possible before coffee." "Cut it." Kramer's voice was gravel and grit. "Where's Panzer?" "Probably where he wants to be. You looking for autographs again?" "I'm looking for a man who hasn't been seen since yesterday afternoon. His landlady called it in this morning. Panzer left his room, took nothing, and didn't come back. If you or Wolfe know where he is, talk now before the DA puts my neck on a tackboard." I glanced toward the staircase. Heavy footsteps told me Wolfe was descending, slowly, like a freight elevator hauling contempt. "Hold the line," I said. "He's coming down to bless you personally." A minute later, Wolfe took the receiver with 2 fingers as if it were unripe fruit. "Yes, Inspector?" Kramer's tone tightened. "Panzer's missing, and you're neck-deep in this Broadway mess. You got anything to say?" "I rarely speak for men who are not here," Wolfe said evenly. "If Mr. Panzer is missing, he will surface, unless he is submerged." "Comforting," Kramer snapped. "Just remember, when he does surface, I'll be standing on the dock." The line clicked dead. Wolfe set the receiver down with a gesture fit for a funeral. "He's worried," I said. "Worry is a tax on ignorance," Wolfe replied. "Mr. Kramer pays in installments." I poured coffee. "He said Saul's been gone since yesterday. No trace. I don't like it." "Nor do I." Wolfe tugged at his sleeve. "Yet Mr. Panzer is not a feather to be blown away. Find him." "Any particular street you'd like me to start with?" "Use your head, not your feet." That was as close to a blessing as I was going to get. By 10 o'clock I was on 8th Avenue, checking the usual corners where operatives trade information and pretend it's friendship. No Saul, no rumours either. At 11, I found a lead at a pawn shop with windows dirtier than Kramer's temper. The owner, a little man whose eyes had been appraised and found insufficient, squinted at me over his glasses. "Locker in the back. Rented yesterday afternoon. Name on the slip was Samuel Parker, cash, no address." "Tall fellow, hat pulled low, grey coat?" He nodded. "Didn't say much. Looked worried." "That's him." I slipped a bill across the counter. "Mind if I take a look?" He didn't mind after seeing Hamilton's smile. I took the key and stepped into the back corridor. The metal lockers were lined up like silent jury boxes. Number 12 opened with a creak. Inside was a flat parcel wrapped in brown paper and string. No gun, no note, just one item that felt like trouble when I touched it. I peeled the paper away and stopped breathing. It was a sketch on vellum, Lorna Vale's missing design, only this time the jewels on the gown weren't drawn in ink. They were set with tiny real stones, diamond chips glued to the paper in a pattern that made the thing sparkle like a ransom note to God. For a second I thought I was seeing a stage prop, then the light caught and bit back. Those were real, a dozen at least. Insurance fraud had just taken centre stage. I slipped the sketch back into its wrapping, locked the box, and left with the key in my pocket and questions in my head. If Saul was hiding evidence, whose side was he on? Ours, the police's, or someone else's payroll? Back at the brownstone, the clock read 12:40, just in time to spoil Wolfe's appetite. He was at his desk, signing checks with the solemnity of a judge signing death warrants. I tossed the locker key on the blotter. "Your boy Saul's been stashing art projects. I found the missing sketch in a pawnshop locker under an alias." He looked up. "Intact?" "Unless you count the diamonds glued to it as mutilation." That got his attention. He took the key, turned it in his fingers, and said, "The addition of jewels to a drawing suggests display rather than artistry. Who knew of its existence?" "Lorna Vale and Renee Garnett for sure. Maybe Saul. And whoever she was blackmailing, if that's what this was about." "Greed," he murmured, "is the most reliable motive in the catalogue. Theatre is its pageant." I sat down. Then what was Saul doing hiding it? Trying to protect someone? Wolfe closed his eyes, thinking. The room was silent except for the faint click of the mantel clock. When he spoke, his voice was low. "Mr. Panther acts only from conscience. If he concealed the sketch, it was to prevent its misuse, to shield a person he believed innocent. But such protection is a luxury we cannot afford." "Then we tell Kramer?" "Not yet. Kramer is honest but clumsy. He would brandish this like a club. We need a scalpel." "Fine," I said. "But if Saul's underwater, I'm not waiting for you to ring a bell." He scowled. "Your impetuosity is not a virtue. Sit." I sat. He dictated notes for 5 minutes. Names, dates, and a few theories that sounded like they'd been imported from ancient Rome. At 1 o'clock sharp, Fritz appeared with lunch and an expression that could have curdled beer. "Pork cutlets and new asparagus, sir." "Excellent," Wolfe said. "Archie, fetch the sketch. I would see the thing before I digest it figuratively." I fetched it from the locker an hour later and returned with the parcel under my arm. He unwrapped it on the desk. The gems flared under the lamp like small, cold eyes. "Real," he said. "Whoever financed this was not economical. Miss Vale's gown was insured for $25,000. Imagine the temptation to turn art into currency." "Insurance fraud," I said. "Or blackmail using the fraud?" "Perhaps both. The jewel attachment is a mockery of value, beauty adorned by avarice. Fui." He pushed the sketch away as if it smelled. "So Saul hides it," I said, "maybe to keep someone from cashing in. The trouble is, now he's gone." Wolfe nodded. "Indeed. We must find him before Kramer does." The phone rang again. I grabbed it. Kramer this time sounded even gruffer. "Goodwin, if you're holding anything on Panzer, spill it." We found his hat in a trash bin behind the Imperial. No blood, no body, just the hat. Maybe he's testing new millinery. "Don't be cute. Tell Wolfe this is getting ugly." He hung up before I could offer sympathy. I relayed it. Wolfe stared at the telephone as if he could will it to repent. "He will surface," he said again, but his voice lacked its usual granite. I leaned back. "You know, your orchids get more privacy than I do. If I told you half of what goes on out there—" "A privilege you daily abuse," he interrupted, "but I permit it for variety." "That's why you keep me around, for colour." "For contrast," he corrected. "Without you, the world would be monochrome in its folly. Now, Archie, guard that sketch. Until Mr. Panther returns, it is our only proof that his absence has purpose." "Suppose he doesn't return?" He looked at me, and for a moment the weight in his eyes wasn't just from lunch. "Then, Mr. Goodwin, I shall owe him a debt that cannot be paid with words." He signalled for beer. Fritz appeared wordlessly with 2 chilled glasses. Wolfe poured his slowly like a ritual. "I drink," he said, "to patience and to Panther." I raised mine. "To finding him before Kramer does." Outside, rain started tapping the windows. The diamonds on the sketch glittered in the lamplight, throwing specks of cold fire around the room. They looked beautiful and worthless, like the truth we still didn't have. If you ever want to see civilization unravel in under 30 seconds, sit through a theatre rehearsal when the lights go out and somebody screams. I was backstage at the Imperial, doing my best impression of a man minding his own business, when the blackout hit. 1 second, a director was bawling about timing. The next, the world went pitch dark, and a woman's shriek cut through the gloom like a torn wire. Seconds later, when the emergency lamps flickered on, half the cast was frozen, and the other half was busy accusing the first half. The stage smelled of sweat, grease paint, and panic, the usual perfume of show business. At the edge of the prop table, Renee Garnett lay sprawled, her robe twisted, a faint silk cord digging into her throat. Her eyes stared up toward the rafters, as if expecting her cue to come from heaven. I dropped to one knee. The cord looked familiar. Too familiar. It was the same fine weave that had done the late Lorna Vale in, only this one had a dusting of powder, the kind they used to kill shine under stage lights. The killer had a flair for consistency. Then, movement. A shadow slipped between scenery flats. I bolted after it. Whoever it was wore a trench coat, the colour of dirty fog, and moved like they knew the layout. I caught a glimpse of a gloved hand pushing open the alley door, then nothing but the slap of shoes on wet pavement. I followed, but the night swallowed him whole. The alley split 3 ways, and I picked the wrong one. When I got back inside, the chorus girls had discovered hysteria as an art form. The stage manager was trying to restore order by yelling louder than everyone else, and the director was threatening to call his lawyer. I told them all to pipe down and phoned for homicide. Kramer showed up 20 minutes later, looking as though he'd been peeled off a bad morning. He had his cigar clenched in his teeth and that expression that says he's about 2 minutes from retiring to a quieter planet. "All right, Goodwin," he said, pushing past the crowd. "You're a regular magnet, aren't you?" "I try to bring excitement wherever I go," I told him. "Sometimes it's fatal." He bent over the body, frowning. "Same knot, same pressure mark." You'd think the guy was proud of his work. "Maybe he is," I said. "But this one comes with a bonus. Theatrical powder on the cord." Kramer grunted, rolling it between his fingers. "We'll have the lab run it." "Any witnesses?" "Just a whole cast of them. Everyone with a motive, none with a flashlight." He straightened, squinting through the haze. "You said you chased somebody." "Trench coat, male build, fast enough to miss my handshake. Lost him in the alley." "Of course you did." He jabbed his cigar at me. "You're lucky he didn't turn around and make you number 3. "Luck's my best feature," I said. He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Look, Goodwin, I know you're in this up to your snappy tie, but don't play Lone Ranger. Tell Wolfe I want results before another body takes a bow." "Believe me, Inspector," I said. "I'll pass that along right after I call in for applause." He didn't smile. Kramer never did when death was fresh. He just muttered an order to Stebbins, who began herding the cast like confused cattle. I ducked into the wings, found a quiet corner by the props, and phoned home. Fritz answered, calm as usual, because nothing short of the apocalypse would rattle him. "Yes, Mr. Goodwin." "Put the big man on the line, Fritz. Tell him I've just watched another curtain fall." There was a pause, the faint sound of footsteps, then Wolfe's voice, thick, precise, and already irritated. "Archie, report." Renee Garnett strangled during a rehearsal blackout. Same method as Lorna Vale. The killer used a silk cord dusted with stage powder. I chased someone, lost him. Kramer's on site, and he's officially out of cigars and patience. Wolfe exhaled audibly. "Idiocy multiplied. You will return here immediately." "Sure," I said, "but don't expect me to bring an encore." "Archie, I insist." He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to, but it hit like a stage cue in capital letters. "I get it," I said. "You want me out before the orchestra starts playing the Death March again." "Precisely. Kramer can manage the chaos. I will manage the reason. Come home." By the time I stepped into the rain, the theatre had already begun to look like a crime scene out of habit. Patrol cars blinked red against wet brick, and the chorus girls were being herded into taxis like nervous doves. The street lamps threw long streaks of gold across puddles that had more reflection than honesty. As my cab pulled away, I looked back once. The marquee lights of the Imperial flickered weakly, spelling out the name of the new show in crooked letters. It read, "Lady in the Dark." I couldn't help thinking the title was doing overtime. At the brownstone, the world smelled of sanity again. Orchids upstairs, dinner downstairs, and Wolfe in his chair, immovable as logic itself. He listened while I gave the report, his eyes half-lidded, fingers steepled. When I finished, he said quietly, 2 women strangled with the same cord, both from the same theatre. The killer performs repetition, not improvisation. Yeah, I said. 2 curtain calls, both fatal. He frowned. Flippancy, Archie, is unbecoming. So's murder. What's our next move? He reached for the bell cord. To bait the killer, of course. One does not catch vermin without cheese. And I'm the cheese? He sighed. A metaphor, not a mandate. Though in your case the distinction is slight. I grinned. If I start squeaking, you'll know why. He gave me the look reserved for moments when affection and irritation overlap. Pfui, go type your notes. So I did, the rain outside drumming time for the 3rd act nobody wanted. When Wolfe drinks beer, it's like a priest saying mass, solemn, deliberate, and not to be interrupted unless the building's on fire. It was 1:30. Lunch had been reduced to fond memories, and he was performing the ritual with his favourite bottle of Remmers. The glass was beaded with chill, the foam sitting on top like a crown that knew it wouldn't last long. I'd finished clearing the plates and was waiting for the signal that conversation was once again permitted. He gave it by exhaling a slow, satisfied rumble. Archie, he said, human stupidity is the only infinite commodity that requires no subsidy. That's comforting, I said. Means we'll never run out of clients. He glared, mildly, for him. The stage, Mr. Goodwin, is a hothouse for such stupidity. Vanity and deception are its fertilizer. Both Miss Vale and Miss Garnett cultivated them lavishly. Yeah, well, someone decided to prune them. He ignored that and leaned back, setting the glass precisely on its coaster. Let us begin where logic demands. Miss Vale was strangled in her penthouse. Motive? Money or silence. Miss Garnett, the same instrument, the same theatre, the same hour. Pattern, no accident, a connection of enterprise. Blackmail, I suggested. Not merely. He reached for the folder on his desk, the one labelled in my handwriting, because his look's like a declaration of war. The photostat you secured, the insurance language lifted verbatim and matched to the fireplace fragment. Yeah, I said. I remember. She insured her costume sketches for 10 grand. Indeed. And who, pray, was the partial beneficiary? Some outfit called Imperial Trust Incorporated. He raised an eyebrow. A charming euphemism. Imperial Trust is a holding company recently formed to manage investments for several Broadway producers. A shell, Mr. Goodwin, hollow except for the rattling of greed inside. So, you're saying our designer and her assistant were shaking down their own backers? He nodded once. Precisely. The costumes provided opportunity. Jewels sewn into fabric, premiums inflated by false valuations, and insurance settlements divided quietly. Blackmail is the logical progression when thieves discover each other. That's elegant, I said. Ugly, but elegant. He sipped his beer. The picture of philosophical contentment. Miss Vale likely attempted to extract more than her share. Miss Garnett, perhaps fearful, sought to defect. The ring silenced both. I leaned forward. And Saul? The look he gave me could have chilled steam. Mr. Panzer was approached because he is incorruptible. They used his reputation as camouflage. When he refused, they turned to coercion. He hid the sketch to shield someone. Someone meaning the killer? Someone meaning a fool he believed redeemable, Wolfe said. Panzer is sentimental in the limited fashion of men who pretend not to be. Kind of like somebody else I know, he scowled. Do not be impertinent. I'm just saying, for a guy who claims to despise sentiment, you've been wearing it pretty loud since Saul went missing. He grunted. Not quite a growl, but close. I will not have him scapegoated by police hysteria. Inspector Kramer's integrity I concede, but his imagination is primitive. That sounded suspiciously like affection, I said. Pfui. He reached for the bell cord, yanking it once. Fritz appeared in the doorway like a man who'd been waiting behind it since breakfast. Another bottle, Fritz, Wolfe said. This inquiry demands fortification. Yes, sir. When the door closed, Wolfe turned back to me. You will, of course, pursue this Imperial Trust. Discreetly. Obtain a list of shareholders and silent partners. Their names will illuminate our stage. Sure, but if this ring is killing off members, maybe I'd like a rehearsal for ducking strangulation. He ignored that. Also, locate the theatre's financial liaison. Someone arranged for those inflated insurance premiums. It may be a clerk with expensive tastes. I'll check the Imperial offices first, the kind of place where the elevators have better morals than the tenants. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close enough to register on the Richter scale. Archie, you are to proceed carefully. The killer has shown both audacity and competence. I cannot afford... He stopped himself. I grinned. You were going to say you can't afford to lose me. Go ahead. It's good for circulation. I was going to say, he said with exaggerated patience, I cannot afford to have my assistant unavailable for dictation. Your vanity intrudes. Sure, I said. We'll call it that. Fritz returned with the second beer. Wolfe poured it with reverence and watched the bubbles rise like proof of divine order. The theatre, he mused, is society's mirror. Yet the audience prefers illusion. They applaud pretense and abhor truth, until truth becomes fashionable. You're getting poetic, I said. Another 5 minutes and you'll start quoting Ibsen. He gave me the narrow-eyed stare that usually precedes Latin. Do your work, and Archie. Yes? Tell Mr. Kramer nothing. He will leak inadvertently to the press, and the Gazette will print another insinuation that I obstruct justice. Which you sometimes do. Only when justice obstructs reason. That one deserved a slow nod. I reached for my notebook and began scribbling. So, let me make sure I've got it straight. We've got 2 women dead, a missing operative, a diamond-studded sketch that's worth more than some small countries, and a company called Imperial Trust that could buy them all. Motive? Greed polished with guilt. Pattern? Consistent. Opportunity shared. Result? Murder times 2. Acceptable, Wolfe said. Add a footnote. The murderer believes himself clever. He will soon learn he is not. Great, I said. I'll make him a copy of that for his scrapbook. He didn't answer, which was his way of agreeing. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, tapping softly against the window panes. Inside, the only sound was the clock and Wolfe's steady, methodical sip of beer, the punctuation mark of contemplation. When he finally spoke again, it was almost to himself. Imperial Trust, greed wrapped in guilt, theatre gilded by corruption. Yeah, I said, Broadway, where reputation costs extra. He looked at me sharply, then reached for the next folder. Archie, type your report. Brevity will suffice. Sure, I said, standing. And if I see Saul first? Tell him, Wolfe said quietly, that his obstinacy has caused me intolerable inconvenience. Translation, you miss him. He lifted the glass, eyes half-lidded. Pfui. I grinned on my way to the typewriter. The beer clinked, the keys started tapping, and the world outside might have been falling apart. But in the brownstone, everything still ran on schedule. Lunch, logic, and the kind of loyalty Wolfe pretended not to notice. The next day, with snow falling since dawn, when Inspector Kramer shows up at our door looking like he's about to apologize, it's either the end of civilization or Fritz's sausages have performed another miracle. This time it leaned toward the latter. Snow had been falling all morning, slow and steady, the kind that muffles Manhattan into pretending it's civilized. By 5 o'clock, the brownstone felt like the only warm spot left in creation. I'd just finished typing Wolfe's latest letter to a life insurance company when the doorbell rang, not the buzzer, mind you, but the actual bell, pressed with hesitation. Fritz went to answer it in person, which he only does for royalty or law enforcement. When he reappeared in the office doorway, he announced in that polite tone of his, Inspector Kramer, Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe, enthroned behind his desk, lifted his brows but didn't move. Show him in. Kramer entered, carrying his hat in one hand and his temper in the other. The cigar was unlit, always a bad sign. He looked around the room as if making sure we hadn't redecorated with skeletons. Evening, Wolfe. Goodwin. Inspector. Wolfe's voice was as smooth as the beer he wasn't yet drinking. Your presence, while seldom a benediction, is at least bracing. Sit. Kramer grunted and lowered himself into the red leather chair. I could practically hear his joints arguing about it. All right, he said. I'll get to it. We've been working the Vale and Garnett cases straight through. The lab's good, but they can't make a theory fit that doesn't. That is their perennial handicap, Wolfe said. Kramer shot him a look. Your boy Panzer's name keeps turning up, and I don't like it. Not because I think he's dirty, because somebody's working hard to make him look that way. Whoever strung those women, he's clever, but not clever enough. The evidence is too neat. I said, meaning it's the kind of neatness you only get when somebody sweeps after themselves. Exactly, Kramer said. We found a print on Garnett's dressing table mirror, half-smudged partial loop pattern. It could be Saul's, but it's planted. The angle's wrong and the powder's fresh enough to belong to yesterday. Wolfe steepled his fingers. You astonish me, Inspector. You display reasoning. To what do we owe the miracle? I'm tired, Kramer said. Tired of chasing ghosts. And if your man's being framed, I'd rather find the truth before the press gets there. That was as close to sentimental as I'd ever heard him get. Fritz chose that exact moment to re-enter with a tray, a covered dish, 2 plates, and the unmistakable aroma of heaven with mustard. Sausages à la Zurichoise, Fritz said. Wolfe inclined his head. You will join us, Inspector. Kramer blinked. I didn't come for dinner. Then you are doubly in need of it. Sit. You don't argue with Wolfe about food. 10 minutes later, the 3 of us were eating. Kramer attacked his portion like a man who distrusted good fortune but wasn't foolish enough to refuse it. I stayed conversational referee. Between mouthfuls, Wolfe said, You remarked upon evidence being too neat, elaborate. Kramer wiped his chin. The cord used on both women came from the same supplier, a theatrical warehouse. Orders placed under 2 different names, paid in cash, both within 48 hours. The handwriting on the receipts doesn't match, but the paper, same batch. Suggesting 1 buyer, 2 disguises, Wolfe said. Right. We ran the addresses, both fake. Whoever it is knows the system. Wolfe poured himself a glass of beer and contemplated it as if it held moral lessons. Inspector, what would your superiors prefer you to do? Arrest Saul Panzer and close the book. The DA's itching for a conviction before the new year. But I'm not slapping cuffs on a man I've respected for 20 years just because it's tidy. Admirable, Wolfe murmured. You are an honest man, Mr. Kramer. It makes you inconvenient. That earned him a short, rusty chuckle. Don't get poetic on me. I still remember you beating us to the punch on the Barron case. My ulcers haven't forgiven you. I assure you, I remember as well. You burst in here waving a warrant and perspiring upon my rug. Yeah, Kramer said, smiling grimly, and you talked me out of it. Don't count on that trick working twice. I said, You 2 should take this act on the road. Call it the thin red line and the thick grey matter. Shut up, Goodwin, Kramer growled, but there wasn't much bark behind it. Wolfe dabbed his lips with his napkin. Inspector, my current hypothesis may relieve your ulcers. The murders were not isolated but commercial. Both victims entangled in a blackmail apparatus centered on a financial consortium, Imperial Trust Incorporated. They exploited theatrical investments and insurance valuations to enrich themselves. When dissension arose, silence was enforced. Kramer frowned. And Panzer? An unwilling intermediary. His conscience interfered, and he concealed the damning sketch to prevent its use. The true architect feared exposure and struck twice to cauterize the leak. Kramer puffed out air, the ghost of a whistle. You got names? Soon, but I require time, and time requires tolerance. He leaned back, chewing the inside of his cheek. You're asking me to hold off a warrant. I'm advising prudence. He stared at Wolfe, then at his empty plate. Fine. I'll give you 48 hours. After that, if I don't see proof, the DA pulls rank. That will suffice, Wolfe said. I don't know why I keep letting you talk me into these things, Kramer muttered, rising. Because reason occasionally triumphs over procedure, Wolfe said. He grunted. You and your fancy words. For the record, those sausages helped. I escorted him to the hall. He was putting on his coat when he said quietly, Tell Wolfe this. If he's right, I'll owe him one. If he's wrong, I'll still owe him. But he won't like how I pay it. I grinned. He never likes how you pay anything, Inspector. But thanks for the olive branch. Olive branch hell, Kramer said. It's just self-defense. When Wolfe's involved, peace offerings are cheaper than aspirin. He pulled on his hat and stomped out into the snow. When I went back to the office, Wolfe was already refilling his glass, eyes half closed in that smug post-victory calm. You handled that neatly, I told him. Phooey, he handled himself. I merely provided the environment. Yeah, I said. You and your sausages. Diplomacy and links. He didn't dignify that with an answer. He just sipped, the clock ticking softly behind him, snow falling beyond the window, and for a brief, quiet moment, there was something that almost felt like friendship in the air, though you'd have to squint hard to see it. If you want to test how much a man values his life, send him into a midtown office pretending to be someone with money. That's what at 2:30 sharp I let myself into the Imperial Arms Hotel, Suite 3C, the number stamped on the brass tag. The door yielded to the key. Inside, a temporary brass plate read A. L. Vane and Associates, Consulting, which was about as honest as a dice game at a church picnic. Inside, the air was thick with stale perfume and colder deceit. I'd made the appointment through a Mr. Larkin, supposedly an acquisitions officer. The receptionist, a blonde with a look that could file invoices and men at the same time, led me into a small meeting room draped in the kind of green velvet that had never seen daylight. She said he'd be right in, and disappeared like smoke. I used the waiting time to look busy. Wolfe's orders had been clear: get the lay of the land, find out if Imperial Trust was laundering its conscience through costume jewellery, and don't get killed before dinner. On the desk sat a ledger open to a page headed Special Clients, Confidential. The entries were neat and cold: serial numbers, stone weights, and payments labelled Settlement. Under one line, Vale, Lorna, final adjustment $25,000. I was about to flip the page when I heard a key turn in the inner door. I straightened, ready to greet Mr. Larkin with my best imitation of a man whose checkbook didn't bounce. What I got instead was a woman in a sable coat, eyes like polished steel and fury to match. She froze at the sight of me. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "Waiting for a Mr. Larkin," I said easily. "But since he's late, I'll accept a substitute if you're qualified." Her lips thinned. "I'm Mrs. Vale." That gave me a small jolt, not the name but the tone. This wasn't the pale, nervous woman who'd hired Saul Panzer 2 weeks ago. This one could have run a bank and scared the auditors into tithing. "You'll forgive me," I said. "I thought Mrs. Vale was, well, deceased." She flung her gloves onto the desk. I imagine that's what she wanted everyone to believe. That got my full attention. "Meaning Lorna Vale wasn't you?" "She was my husband's assistant," the woman snapped. "She stole my identity, my accounts, and most of my jewellery. When she realised the insurance company was closing in, she fabricated a death, mine, to collect. I came back from Palm Beach to find myself reading my own obituary. If she was lying, she deserved a Tony Award. If she wasn't, we'd just tripped over the plot twist of the season." Before I could test it, a noise came from the hall, a sharp metallic click that didn't belong to janitors. The woman paled. "They followed me." "Who's they?" I began, but the door burst open before grammar could finish the question. A man in a trench coat stepped in, gun first, face second. He had the hollow eyes of someone who'd long ago stopped expecting applause. "All right," he said. "Nobody moves. Mrs. Vale, you talk too much." I raised my hands to shoulder level, partly for effect, partly because bullets don't care about wisecracks. "Look, pal, if this is a business meeting, you're missing the memo pads." He didn't smile. "You first, smart boy. Who are you?" "New investor," I said. "Interested in Imperial Trust's fine tradition of misappropriation." "Funny," he said, cocking the gun. "Let's see how funny you are when—" He never finished because something large and fast came out of the adjoining closet. There was a crash, a grunt, and the gun skittered across the carpet like a kicked can. "Saul!" I yelled. He didn't answer right away, too busy introducing the gunman's head to the filing cabinet. When the noise settled, he turned, breathing hard but grinning. "You always pick dramatic reunions, Archie." "I try to keep things lively," I said. "Next time send a card." Mrs. Vale had collapsed into a chair, staring at the two of us like she'd wandered into a bad play. "You, both of you, what is this?" "Clean-up crew," I said. "Mr. Panzer here's been missing long enough to start rumours." Saul dusted his sleeve. "I figured they'd used the suite again. Been hiding in that closet since noon." "You sure know how to make an entrance," I told him. "And a mess." He bent, pocketing the gun. "Lorna Vale and her pals used Imperial Trust as a laundry. When she tried to skim extra, they panicked. They framed me by dropping my name where it didn't belong." "Which brings us," I said, "to our charming visitor." The real Mrs. Vale straightened, colour returning. I came to recover my husband's records. He's been dead 3 months, but his partners kept the business running, illegally. Saul opened the ledger I'd found. These are payoffs, hush money for investors they blackmailed. Look here, code numbers match the jewels sewn into Lorna's costumes. Blackmail dressed up as fashion, I said. Very Manhattan. The woman's jaw tightened. Then my husband was involved. Hard to say, Saul said. But somebody wanted both veils out of the picture. The man on the floor groaned. I kicked the gun out of his reach. Don't mind him, I said. He's only the understudy. Saul glanced toward the door. We need to move before his friends come looking. Agreed, I said. You still remember how to vanish? He smiled faintly. You still remember how to talk too much? We left the suite by the service stair, Mrs. Vale between us. Outside, the wind had turned the snow into stinging needles. Saul handed me the ledger, his eyes serious. Get this to Wolfe, it's the proof he needs. I took it. You're not coming? Not yet. There's one more name missing from the ledger, the one who signed the checks. I'll find him. Saul, tell Wolfe I owe him an apology, he said, pulling his hat low, and a favour. Then he disappeared into the swirling white like a ghost who didn't have time to haunt anyone. Mrs. Vale shivered beside me. Is he always like that? Only on weekdays, I said. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was at his desk, the orchids above him glowing in lamplight like a jury that already knew the verdict. I laid the ledger on the blotter. He looked up. You were successful? I was lucky, I said. Saul showed up before the guy with the gun made me an obituary footnote. Then I'm gratified. He opened the ledger, scanning it once. Imperial Trust, indeed. The irony is excessive. Yeah, I said, sinking into my chair. 2 Mrs. Vales, 1 corpse too many, and Saul popping out of closets. We should charge extra. Wolfe grunted. No, we shall charge adequately. Greed, Mr. Goodwin, is already overrepresented. I smiled. That's philosophy. You must be hungry. Phooey, bring beer. And just like that, the curtain fell on another rehearsal for murder, with me playing the clown, Wolfe directing the logic, and the world outside still waiting for its next act. If Nero Wolfe had ever taken the stage, Broadway would have folded. He didn't need footlights. One raised eyebrow did the work of a spotlight. That evening, the brownstone office looked more crowded than a Sunday matinee. Kramer stood near the Globe bar, hat low, chewing a cigar that wasn't lit because Fritz had suggested no smoke around the curtains. Saul Pantzer leaned against the wall, expression calm and eyes sharp. Mrs. Vale sat stiffly on the red leather couch, wearing a black suit that announced she'd had enough drama for one lifetime. 2 investors from Imperial Trust whispered near the door, and the theatre company's producer, one Mr. Edmund Roth, occupied the client chair like a man volunteering for dental work. Wolfe had arranged the scene the way a conductor places his orchestra. He sat behind his desk, vast, immovable, and disgusted at humanity in general. I took my usual chair, notebook ready, acting as chorus and scribe. He began without ceremony. Mr. Roth, he said, your business thrives on illusion. Tonight you will regret importing that ethic into finance. Roth tried a laugh. If this is about those insurance rumors, I've told the police. Silence. Wolfe's palm flicked like a judge's gavel. Your protestations are surplusage. Mr. Goodwin, the photostat. I handed it over. Wolfe unfolded it with the gravity of unveiling a flag. This invoice, purporting to record the purchase of costume jewels, is dated 3 weeks before Lorna Vale's death. The handwriting and phrasing, particularly the clause, a replication of the original tiara, faithful to detail and insured to match, were borrowed from your own correspondence. Roth shifted. Coincidence. Coincidence, Wolfe repeated, rolling the word like a bad oyster. Then you will forgive my inference that you drafted the forgery yourself, using the same phrase you employed in a memo to Imperial Trust's auditors, a charming signature for your undoing. Kramer grunted. You're saying Roth fixed the books and used fake jewelry to cover his debts? Precisely. He ensured the reproductions as genuine, then conspired with Miss Vale to stage a theft. When she decided to increase her fee by blackmail, he resorted to murder. Renee Garnett stumbled upon the ledger, hence her fate. Roth slammed the arm of the chair. That's insane. You can't prove. Wolfe raised a finger. Proof is the inspector's métier. I am content with demonstration. He turned to Mrs. Vale. Madam, you can confirm that your late husband's partnership papers granted Mr. Roth full fiscal control. She nodded. Yes, my husband trusted him. A misplaced virtue, Wolfe said. When the embezzlement surfaced, Miss Lorna Vale, your namesake, posed as you to divert suspicion while extracting hush money. She hired Mr. Panzer, ostensibly to trace a blackmailer, in reality to test whether she herself was being watched. When she realized the circle tightening, she sought additional leverage. Instead, she met the silk cord. The room went still. You could hear Kramer's cigar complain between his teeth. I said, "Neat play, except for the gunman Saul flattened in Suite 3C. An emissary, Wolfe said, sent to retrieve the ledger and silence any witnesses. Mr. Roth, your choice of thugs was as poor as your handwriting." Kramer stepped forward, voice gruff but steady. "If you've got the ledger and that invoice, it's plenty for the DA." Wolfe's head tilted. Indeed. Yet I prefer to hear the music reach its final chord. He pressed the bell cord. Fritz appeared, unobtrusive as an apology, carrying a tray with beer in chilled glasses. Wolfe accepted one, gesturing for Fritz to serve Kramer as well. The inspector hesitated, then took it. Diplomacy via malt. Roth rose suddenly. "You've got nothing binding. I was framed by that woman. By both of them." Wolfe's voice cut through the protest like a scalpel. "Your phrasing betrays you again, sir. Both of them? You had not been told Mrs. Vale was alive until 5 minutes ago." Roth froze, colour draining as if the lights had dimmed for his exit cue. Kramer's brows climbed. "Well, that does it." He pulled the handcuffs from his pocket with a sigh that sounded more tired than triumphant. "Edmund Roth, you're under arrest for the murders of Lorna Vale and Renee Garnett, and for assorted creative accounting." Roth tried one last act. "You'll regret this." "Possibly," Kramer said, snapping the cuffs, "but it'll be worth it." Saul opened the door as if it were part of the script. The cops waiting outside took their cue, leading Roth out under the quiet hiss of snow beyond the stoop. Kramer lingered. "You were right again, Wolfe. Damn nuisance, that." "I am accustomed to being a nuisance," Wolfe said. He nodded to Saul. "You did good work, Panzer. And you, Goodwin, try not to dramatize this in your report." I said, "Not a chance. It's already halfway to curtain call." He snorted, jammed the cigar back in his mouth and left. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed. Another man convicted by his own diction. How deplorably simple. "Simple for you," I said. "I just dodge bullets and type it up." He opened one eye. "And you will type it up tonight." "Sure," I said, "while you take bows from a chair." His mouth twitched. "Pfui, I leave applause to actors." "Which makes you the best director in town," I said. He didn't answer, but the faintest hum of satisfaction rose as he reached for his beer. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet, impartial, erasing the city's footprints one lie at a time. Evening quiet in the brownstone has a sound of its own, like Manhattan exhaling after holding its breath all day. The traffic hum outside was softened by snow, the radiator ticked like a polite metronome, and somewhere upstairs the orchids were getting their nightly sermon. Fritz served dinner with the reverence of a man presenting a holy relic. Beef roulade, red cabbage, and just enough gravy to make you forget there were murders in the world. Wolfe was in his element. Clean napkin folded to geometry, beer poured into a chilled glass, the day's lunacy behind him, theoretically. Saul Panzer sat at the far end of the table, looking as though he'd rather be anywhere else than being publicly appreciated. Fritz, beaming, refilled his plate anyway. I took my seat opposite Wolfe because every ritual needs an audience, and I'm the one who writes the reviews. When Fritz had withdrawn, Wolfe lifted his glass. "Mr. Panzer," he said, "your refusal, twice rendered, was the act of a man not merely cautious but moral. You declined complicity, not employment. That is rare." Saul's ears turned the shade of an embarrassed stoplight. "I just didn't like the smell of the job." "Precisely," Wolfe said, leaning back. "Instinct unsullied by ambition. In this city, it is as rare as unwatered gin." He took a long drink, sighed, and set the glass down. "You have my respect and my gratitude." Saul gave a sheepish grin. "That's enough reward, sir?" I said. "It had better be. He doesn't offer raises." Wolfe shot me a glare over the rim of his glass that would have singed smaller men. "Archie, your levity is relentless." "That's why you keep me," I said. "I balance the beer with bubbles." He grunted, which from Wolfe counted as affection. For a few minutes the only sound was the quiet scrape of cutlery and the city breathing beyond the windows. Wolfe's shoulders eased, his eyes half closing in satisfaction. For him, digestion was both art and absolution. When he finally spoke again, it was softer. "The theatre," he mused, "offers illusion as comfort. Our case began there, with costumes, deceit, and applause for falsehood. Yet truth, too, is a performance. It must be staged to be believed." I said, "And you always get top billing." "Phooey," he muttered, though there was the ghost of a smile. "The truth was simple. The difficulty lay in surviving it long enough to present it." Saul stood, hat in hand. "I'll leave you gentlemen to your dessert. And Archie, next time a lady calls at midnight, let it ring." "Sure," I said, "unless it's the kind who pays in advance." He chuckled, gave Wolfe a short nod, and slipped out into the winter night, quiet, solid, and decent as ever. Wolfe watched the door close. "He is the best man I know," he said simply. "High praise," I said, "and well earned. You almost sounded sentimental." He looked at me, heavy-lidded. "Almost." Then he pushed back from the table. "I'm going to the Orchids. They at least will not attempt repartee." He rose with the slow dignity of a ship lifting anchor, and the elevator groaned its way upward. The house settled into its familiar rhythm, Fritz humming faintly in the kitchen, the snow outside turning the street lamps to halos. I took my coffee to the office, set up at the typewriter, and began the report. The clatter of keys sounded loud against the hush, every word a footstep closing the case. Wolfe would read it in the morning, strike out adjectives, and claim authorship by sheer gravity. Still, it was a good ending. Saul's refusals had started the whole mess, and in the end, cleared it. In this town, even saying no could get you strangled, shot at, or subpoenaed. But, as I typed the last line and reached for my coat, I decided it wasn't all bad. After all, saying no also paid Wolfe's bills.